All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly tour. I'm excited to have you all with us, both on Zoom and on Facebook Live. Just a couple of guidelines before we begin. So first of all, we're asking everyone to mute themselves just so we can hear our docent and there are no interruptions. And then also, if you have any questions during the chat, we would love to hear them, but just put them in the chat box, and we'll get to them at the end. So if something comes up during the lecture and you have a question about it, just go ahead and drop it in the chat, which I believe you can find at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to it at the end. And if we don't get to it at the end, our wonderful docent has volunteered to give you his email address, and you can also email with any follow-up questions. So with that, I'd like to introduce our docent for the day, Manuel, and he'll be leading us on a tour of the ladies of the Timken.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Timken. The particular focus of our tour today is the ladies of the Timken, those women that inspire us to our different pieces of art that will be highlighted during this tour. The first ones we're going to look at are the women that actually are the basis for the development of the Timken, and that is Anne and Amy, the Putnam sisters. If we go ahead and change that. Anne and Amy came from a very wealthy family here in San Diego. They were spinsters. They never got married. But the important thing was that they spent their money on art, and quite a bit of it. Amy, in fact, had a proclivity for Russian icons. And in her time, she collected over 400 of them, which is the largest single collection by anybody in this country. And we have a wonderful icon gallery. The first one we're going to look at today is Niccolo de Buonaccorso's Madonna and Child. It's a tempera on wood panel. Now, tempera is a mixture of paint using egg yolk for the base, and they would mix it with the different pigments to produce this. It would dry quite fast, so they'd have to paint it quite fast. And this particular one is kind of Gothic, the Gothic style, because we haven't developed into what they call the Renaissance style so far. What's being portrayed, of course, is the Mother of God, the Madonna. And in this particular one, she's seated with Jesus, her Christ, and she is presenting him to the world. She's presenting him to the world in the sense that he looks like an adult. He's here. He's pure with some of the materials he has in his hand. He's offering his mother a flower of innocence. And she looks a little concerned, of course, because she knows her son will end up being sacrificed for the sins of man. These are also part of a thing called a triptych. You notice in the right-hand side, which was a threefold devotional that people could keep in their homes, and also they had in churches. And you could see where the different parts of the saints involved with the Virgin in this. But as you can see, you see more of a style of not being so flat, but more well-rounded, especially in her flesh tones. But this is a typical example of early Renaissance painting. We're going to look at the next one when we get into the Renaissance, and that's Bartolomeo Veneto's Portrait of a Lady in a Green Dress. This is one of my more favorite pieces. This is in our Italian gallery. It is an oil, which is on a panel. Oils are different than tempera because you use oil as the mix, and because of it, the colors are darker, richer, and they can take their time. It doesn't dry as fast as tempera does. The woman has a petulant look on her face. The reason being that this is probably a painting that was going to go to a suitor. And from that, it would be determined like seeing a picture of your girlfriend somewhere. But the petulant look has always been probably stated that maybe she isn't too crazy about what's going. But if you look at the other picture in the corner, this is another one by Veneto. This is the kind of style that he did, where you have this pensive look, kind of looking out into something. Are you looking into something fortunate or not? She, in her case, of course, is dressed in the time, just beautiful layers of paint in the green, showing the folds and the bodice. And on the top, you have what they call the cordellino, which was a structured hairband or head covering that women would wear at the time. She also had the paintings of her hair as red, which was quite distinctive of women of her time. Uh, you can see, of course, the different shadings of light and dark that brings this three-dimensional look that the Renaissance is known for. All right. Then we're going to go over to my particular favorite, which is the tapestries in our foray in the Timken Museum. Tapestry is a woven cloth. This is just one of a set of four that we have in the museum. You can see that in there, it's not as bright because it's been faded because of the sunlight. These tapestries were weaved on a loom by as many as 10 to 15 people. The one we have in the museum is about 25 feet tall. They were very popular in the 14th to the 17th centuries, being that they would cover up the walls and buildings, and in one way being functional with the heat. They were very complex pieces, and they were considered to be very important to the household that would get them. It would develop. You'd probably wonder, how did they get this on there? They would develop a cartoon or a representative of what they wanted to do. They would put that in front of the weavers, and they would weave this thing either horizontally or vertically on there. So these are the Timken, I think, is very privileged to have these. I don't know if there's very many on the West Coast, but this collection is pretty spectacular. It was part of a group of 16. Now, the tapestries were developed by the courts in Italy, but were eventually taken to France, to Fontainebleau, and then they opened up schools to have this done. The picture being shown in here, of course, is a woman, and which is, again, our topic about this today, is the woman in this is Queen Artemisia. She was a queen in ancient Persia about 300 BCE. And for some, you're going, why would anybody want to do a woman as being a leader when in the 15th century or the 16th century that these countries were run by men? But in France at the time, they had a woman who was in charge, and that was Catherine de' Medici. Her picture is in the lower left-hand corner. Catherine de' Medici was the sponsor for her son. Her husband, Henry II, had died early, and she became the regent for the country. And so doing, she ruled for her son, who were very, very young. The story behind this is very interesting because the reason it was done in this way was to attract the people with wealth to buy these and also to give alms to the poor, which is what you see Artemisia doing through her son. Think of this as Catherine with her young son, Francis II, and he's giving alms to people. In other words, he's giving contributions. Paris is one of the largest cities in Europe at the time, and the one way to really get people to give is to look at Catherine as being a leader, and then you would follow suit. So many rich people did this. So it was kind of like, I hate to put it this way, but a publicity stunt, but a way to get people to contribute to the poverty in Paris, and it worked. Quite a few did this. So again, how women influence how we see our art that we have. The next one up is one of my favorites, and this is in our Dutch gallery. This is Anthony van Dyck, whose picture is below, and the subject of this is Mary Villers, or Lady Hebert of Sherlin. She was actually the daughter of the Duke of Buckingham, who was a favorite of Charles I or Charles the First of England. In this, Van Dyck was known for painting pictures of court scenes. In fact, he was a court painter. The interesting thing is to look at him, the self-portrait of him, and he was kind of flamboyant in his own style, but was very, very popular, not just in England, but all over Europe. Now, Mary Villers, the picture is taken when it was painted. She's about 15 years old, and she has a very reserved look because what she's doing, she is in mourning. And the issue is that you notice on her bodice and on her waist, she has a black tied cockade. And the key to it is she's trying to show you that she is just recently a widow. But she's not overwhelmed with the idea that this is something that is going to affect her. She was a favorite of Charles because when her father passed away, the Duke of Buckingham, actually was murdered, she became a ward of his and was very prominent within the court. I like the way he does it because Van Dyck used to paint very quickly, and there's long strokes. And if you look at her gown, you'll notice there's long strokes. So a lot of times he didn't finish it. He had his apprentices in there fill in the rest of it. But you can see she's very pale skinned. She has very red hair. But it's the look on that face, because this is a look of a woman who probably understands her position in the court. And being so young and being a widow, she had a enormous amount of, I guess, leeway with others in the court. The next picture I'm going to show you is very quickly, once Allison prays it. This is what Van Dyck was known, which was for these portraitures. And yes, the woman in the middle is Mary Villers. She is being bequeathed to the man in red, John, the Duke of Pembroke, who she did not love. She actually loved the brother who's standing next to her. But the Pembroke family is by itself interesting because you're seeing the elite of English, but you're looking at old money. These people ended up inheriting their wealth through land, not like Mary's father, Buckingham, who was anointed with his title in his devotion to Charles I. You'll notice up in the left-hand corner, there's some angels there because right below are three of the Lord of Pembroke's sons who never, ever got to adulthood. They died when they were children. So this is like, if some of you can remember the TV show Dynasty, and they talked about the machinations of families who have wealth and everything that goes with it. Well, think of this as that show. Everybody had an issue, and it's quite hilarious, and it's also quite fascinating. But again, I wanted to show you how these large portraitures did. This is actually the largest portrait that he ever did of a royal family. So he was quite famous on that. All right, we're going to go to the next one. And this is a portrait of Marguerite de Sèvres, who is a noblewoman, and she's married to Bartholomew J. Claude Pupel. And you'll notice him in the bottom. This was the beginning of what we would call a style from classic going into Rococo, which meant that was more lavish, but Rococo was more set that the style affected the way of an older class becoming a newer class. This was done by a gentleman by the name of Nicholas Langear. I'm sorry if I don't get the pronunciation just quite, but it's very expressionful and is decorative. You'll notice Marguerite herself and how she's dressed in this beautiful red dress, which also was a standpoint of royalty. She did come from a wealthy family, also noble family. Her husband was what you call bourgeoisie. In other words, he was a rich noble, a rich commoner. And they are the ones that are going to change how the government will go through their revolution in less than about 50 years. But already the court was changing. If you look at her dress, there's a few things I want to bring out. Number one, her her texture of her skin and everything was typical of this before they got heavily into makeup. But it was a sense of putting this really heavy makeup on. Some of it, unfortunately, was lead based, and some of these poor women ended up with some issues probably later on. But I want you to also notice too the lack of jewelry. If you'll notice, she has a covering in her hair, and in her bodice, she has flowers. And one of the ideas was, of course, this was leading from the time of a highly classical French society under Louis XIV into one that's going into enlightenment. In other words, looking at life not through the royalty of the one, but looking towards more of the individual. The breastplate that she's got in is a decorative part, and it's also a nod to the classical styles of ancient Rome and Greece. She's also showing what women did best. If you'll notice with her, she's got her hand on a book of songs and a fan. Well, the fan was a very casual way that women would use to hide. The book is interesting because it's a book of songs. And in particular, the songs that she's singing are drinking songs. So basically, women still, even then, before they assumed a greater sense of their own authority under the revolution, you can see that these songs were meant to be welcoming to people into their house, so that she would lead them in some kind of a drinking song. Now, real quick, the other picture next to her, of course, is her husband. He is a lawyer, and if you'll notice, he has books of law next to him. But again, you can see that these are painted in pairs. Also, the artist, Laguerre, was 73 when he did these. So he was well along in being quite famous within French society through that. Okay, and then we have one more. And this is the last one of the last pieces that I have. And this is John Singleton Copley, who is the one of the first recognized American artists. And this particular painting he has done, this is in 1771. This is an oil on canvas. And this is Mrs. Thomas Gage. Mrs. Thomas Gage was married to General Gage, who was a famous British officer during the Revolutionary War. Margaret was a colonial. She was born in this country. And when Singleton drew her or painted her, she was expressing the styles that were being shown in the courts of Europe through the different and fashioning styles. A lot of it Turkish based, or there was this fascination with what was going on in the Middle East. And you see she has a turban on her hair. She has a silk caftan, and she has this very languid pose, like she's looking out into the future. And it's not one of discontent as one is more like a little fascination. Again, I'm still going to go with this idea with these holes in their dresses. They were so striking that when you see them in person, they literally pop off the canvas. It takes an enormous amount of patience, but as we've seen, as we've gone through the gallery over this last 25 minutes, the biggest thing that we've noticed is the difference in styles between each one of the artists. Now, what makes Mrs. Gage so fascinating and Singleton's art? One of the deals was, of course, that she was a colonial. Her husband was in charge of British troops in North America. Now, we were seeing that less than a few years from when this picture was painted, that we were in our revolution. Well, Mrs. Gage at the time, also had a relationship with a certain doctor by the name of John Warren. And there is some gossip had gone around that she may have had an affair with him. But John Warren is the one that notified both Sam Adams and Paul Revere about the British going to put down the uprising in Concord and Lexington, which was the very beginning of the revolution. Now, how did they know that? Well, supposedly, when they asked General Gage about it later, General Gage said there was literally only two people he had told about that. Because one was his aide, and the other was his wife. So we're kind of thinking that maybe in her own way, Margaret actually was a patron, and she may have done that. Not too long after the war got invested, he sent his wife back to England to keep her out. But she is a fascinating story by herself. But again, the picture stands on its own, portrait of the time that shows how people, we see women within the society that we live in. So, if there are any questions, go ahead and ask. I know this is a little short, but I just wanted everybody to get involved in this collection. And maybe I think you need to take a little bit of time and come in and to view it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Manuel. Yeah, so there's no questions in the chat at the moment, but maybe, we'll get some as we chat here. But something that just kind of occurred to me as I was looking at these, and you mentioned earlier the idea of, PR. This is kind of maybe a PR move that Catherine de Medici was doing. So how realistic do you think these portraits are? Like, we're looking at Mrs. Thomas Gage here, and she's obviously very beautiful and well dressed and has this expression. And then I was also looking at the pictures of the artists themselves, and they must have done their own portraits. And so I don't know, can you just speak at all to maybe how realistic versus idealized these portraits might have been?
Well, if you think about back to the Renaissance, where I showed you the picture of the lady in green, that was probably more of a way of showing a classical look of what women should look at the time. The funny thing is they don't smile, which is a lot of people get a little flummoxed. They don't. And it was considered not appropriate to smile because it showed kind of a weakness. The other thing, too, that you have to learn is that dentistry wasn't the best back then. And most of their teeth weren't in the best condition. In fact, if you'll notice, every one of our ladies, not one of them is smiling. And you can take that as being so much of the style that they were presenting, but as actual the way that they looked, as we go through each semblance of this, from the Renaissance through what we call the classical period, all the way up to mannerisms and into abstract. Before you get into abstract, one of the things that killed portrait art was the camera. But I think with Singleton, you probably have the best expression of exactly what they look like. But the idea, of course, is to show them in a way that they're appropriate to the person being presented, because they sure didn't want to bring in the ideal of somebody who looked unpleasant. Mm-hmm. I don't know if any of us wanted to have a picture. I know my wife constantly has me take pictures of her when she's too happy the way she looks. So I don't think that was much different. We always want to present ourselves the best. But as far as actual representations, I think the older and until photography, I think you actually had what people really look like, especially in portraiture art.
Yeah, and it does seem interesting, like you were saying, that when they're in the Renaissance, they look realistic, but I think I would say this looks even more realistic, in the 18th century here. And then, of course, we hit, Impressionism and like abstract art, and that just all gets thrown out the window. It's almost like once they hit the pinnacle, and you're right, with the advent of photography, an interesting way that it kind of hit, the most realistic, and then just went totally in the opposite direction. Yeah, so it's I don't know, an interesting thing. And I think also what you said about, even if it wasn't them exactly, it was still like who they were, so even if that wasn't exactly how they
Mhm.
looked, there were still certain attributes, like maybe she liked music, and so they have the book open, and maybe she wasn't actually, maybe that wasn't exactly how the book looked, I don't know, but yeah, kind of the
You
idea
have
of
to remember a lot of these,
attributes.
Alice, you have to remember a lot of these were painted by men,
Mhm.
and it was a men viewpoint, even though, and I have to check on this, is that I don't quite remember if we have any female artists represented in the Timken. I may be wrong on that. I need to find that out. But that would sure, because they were famous, there were two or three very famous female artists during the Renaissance, and their paintings were just as good. But, we're talking about a society that was dominated by men, and they were the ones that were taken into consideration. But there are many, many female artists. We see it more today, but I don't want people to think that there weren't any. And it would be really nice. And again, I have to check this, if the Timken does have female artists in
Yeah,
display.
I don't believe we have any pictures painted by females. I could also be wrong, but of course, our patrons are the Putnam sisters, and we actually had a question in the chat, just wanting to hear a little bit more about them. I don't know if you can tell any more about kind of their life story or how they got interested in, collecting this art, and also, especially as women, having that kind of, patronage.
Well, they did at first because they collected as much art as they could from about the 1920s. How they got involved with the Timkens was that the Timkens also settled here in San Diego, and the family also collected art. In fact, the Timken family is actually the ones that underwrote the opening of the San Diego Museum of Art.
Mm.
And it's kind of like that when the one Timken founder, one female, and I don't remember exactly who she was, when she passed, the Putnam sisters kind of pushed themselves in there. And by the 1940s, they had become the prominent sponsors for the San Diego Museum of Art. Most of their art went there. One of the things I'm really surprised about is that the San Diego Museum of Art still holds quite a bit of the Putnam collection, because she did gift it to them. They're not going to give it back. But what's interesting is that they were working in collaboration between that and the director of the San Diego Museum of Art. And then somehow, with one of the sisters, and I don't exactly know which one, there was a disagreement. I think it maybe was Amy. And nobody knows exactly why. At the Putnam sisters stopped contributing to the San Diego Museum of Art, and then eventually they worked with the Timken family and actually developed this idea for the museum that was designed and built in the 1950s. So
Yeah.
yeah, we can definitely say that the reason this art exhibit is here is because of those women. And even in the Timken family, the custodian for the San Diego Museum of Art, or the one who is the curator, was a woman also. So in a lot of ways, that's why I wanted to talk about the ladies, because they're the ones that brought this art piece here, and they're the ones I wanted to follow.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's true that, it's a kind of a female driven effort. And also that does show up a little bit in the art, because we have these great portraits of women. And, I always wonder if that was sort of, why they collected them too, because they were interested in that, and they were sort of powerful, wealthy women also. So, yeah. I
Right, Allison?
I don't see any other questions in the chat, but if anyone who's here wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, you're more than welcome to do so. And I think you also said that you would maybe put your email in the chat. Um,
Yes, I will.
so maybe you can do that
If
now.
anybody asks a question that I can't answer, I'll go ahead.
Yeah, we'll look it up for you also. Yeah. But yeah, if there's
I'd
any,
like, I'd like to ask a question.
yeah, go right ahead.
Didn't didn't the sisters, didn't they insist that they wanted the Temkin to always be free
Yes,
to the
ma'am, that's
public?
absolutely true.
Yeah, and the idea of kind of art being open to all, I think is
All
something.
people. That's why you're not charged for the Timken, because the
Mhm.
sisters wanted that collection to be free as their almost as their gift to the people of San Diego. But they wanted the artist, they wanted it to be free. The Timken Foundation which paid for most, in fact, if not all of it. I think they got other grants to build the museum itself. One of the interesting stories about it is that at first the Balboa Park Association wasn't too crazy about the style, but the Timken's architect said that it melded well, and it is a beautiful structure, and it does set itself as kind of a jewel amongst all the regular Spanish style that we have there.
Want to go back so you can see it here. Oops, oh, so you can see them. There we go.
So they were quite giving as far as the interesting thing is the ladies never got married. They had a younger sister who died very early. It had a very big impact upon the family as far as how the ladies, the youngest sister died back in 1936. And I didn't quite remember, I didn't quite figure out what she died from. The sisters themselves took up this mantle. They were both wealthy, and they felt that wealth well served is for the general public, and thus their collection and sharing it out. I mean, think about it. Amy had a collection of over 400 Gothic icons, Russian Orthodox icons, the largest single collection by anybody in this country. It still is the largest collection in this country. And we have a beautiful icon gallery. I mean, to really see that.
Yeah,
I just have a comment, Allison. I'm sorry, I guess I forgot to put my picture there, but Manny, I want to say that I really loved your engagement, especially when you used an example for modern times that would be so appropriate for, say, teenagers, when you made that reference to the TV show Dallas and the wealth that was depicted in the family, just on that TV show, to make that painting you were speaking of, I believe from the French gallery at the time, so engaging for us. And then I was listening to you, and you so often had questions that you answered, and sometimes not, rhetorical questions perhaps, that really kept my interest and engagement in what you were saying. So I want to thank you for making your presentation so real for us.
Well, thank you very much, Barbara. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, and some of you might know that Barbara gave our tour a couple weeks ago, and so she's one of our docents as well. So thank you, Barbara.
Allison.
Any other questions or anything? No? If not, I think we're getting about to the time anyway. So Manny, if you wanted to put your email address in the chat right now so people can see
Yes,
it.
I will.
Close the video. And then I just wanted to let everyone know that we have another tour next week at the same time. And Barbara will actually be there along with another one of our docents, Eleanor, and they'll be giving a joint tour. And then the week after that is Thanksgiving, so we'll be off, and there will be no tour that week, but we'll be back the week after that. So yep, we'll just have him put his email there. If you have any questions, feel free to email him, and we'll see you next week. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks everybody for coming.